In the gentle, tree-lined calm of sinking spring, Pennsylvania, the short house looked like any other: trimmed lawn, white siding, the faint scent of cut grass curling through late summer air. Nothing about the two-story colonial hinted at the storm forming behind its windows. To neighbors, the Shorts seemed almost unremarkably ideal. Mark Short, the soft-spoken father and pharmacist who smiled politely on his evening walks. Megan, bright-eyed, always carrying a baby bag and moving with the brisk rhythm of a mother who kept lists for everything. 3 children filled their home: Liana, 8, Mark Jr., 5, and Willow, 2. They seemed to orbit their parents' lives like warm little suns. There are houses that hum with routine, coffee brewing, homework spread across kitchen tables, the steady percussion of daily survival, and the Short house hummed like that. In photos, they looked content. But every perfect photo has a shadow just beyond the flash, and theirs began long before the final tragedy. Megan had once been radiant. Friends remembered her energy, the way she could light up small talk at PTA meetings. Yet inside, she carried an anxiety that never fully slept. She confided to friends that Mark was distant, meticulous to a fault, cold sometimes, though never violent. She would defend him quickly, saying, "He just gets overwhelmed, you know? He bottles things up." Mark Short was the kind of man who lived behind quiet rules. A pharmacist by training, he approached life clinically: dosage, schedule, precision. He didn't yell. He withdrew. He didn't argue. He shut down. At first, that calm steadied Megan. Over time, it suffocated her. In 2013, their third child, Willow, was born with a severe congenital heart defect, hypoplastic left heart syndrome. From the first day of her life, machines had to do what her body couldn't. Surgeries followed, one after another. Megan camped out in hospital hallways, clutching blankets that smelled like antiseptic and formula. Mark visited when he could, still commuting to work, keeping the insurance alive. The hospital became their second home, the beeping monitors their lullaby. When Willow finally came home, the house changed. The living room turned into a mini ICU, oxygen tanks, feeding tubes, medication schedules taped to the fridge. Friends stopped visiting as often. The chaos was too raw, the fear too constant. Megan's social media turned from family outings to medical updates. She wrote about strength, about hope, about gratitude. Behind the posts, she was unraveling. Mark began sleeping in the guest room. He said it was so Megan and the baby could rest better. In truth, they had drifted into separate worlds, orbiting the same address. He handled bills and prescriptions. She lived minute to minute, keeping Willow alive. Conversations between them thinned to logistics, appointments, dosages, grocery lists. When Willow turned 2, she still needed constant monitoring, but Megan dared to hope the worst was over. Then, one morning that March, the world stopped again. Megan found Willow unresponsive in her crib. The ambulance arrived within minutes. But hope was already gone. The house that had fought so hard to keep life inside now became a cathedral of silence. The funeral was small. The coffin heartbreakingly tiny, white lilies draped across its lid. Megan stood in black, pale and hollow-eyed, while Mark placed his hand on her shoulder with the awkwardness of a man comforting someone he no longer knew how to reach. After the service, Megan collapsed against her mother, whispering, "I don't want to go home." Grief changes the chemistry of a household. It can fuse people together, or it can turn every shared object into a landmine. For Megan and Mark, it did both. For a while, they tried therapy. They tried prayer. They tried pretending. But Willow's absence grew larger, not smaller. Megan's sadness hardened into despair, then anger. She accused Mark of not feeling enough. He accused her of drowning in sorrow. Why that summer, Megan's social media updates began to sound like coded cries. "Some days I think I can't do this anymore," she wrote in one post. "But I look at my kids and know I have to." Her friends commented hearts and prayers. No one called. In May 2016, Megan told a friend she wanted separation. She said she couldn't breathe in that house anymore, that every corner reminded her of Willow's machines. Mark agreed to move out temporarily. He rented a small apartment nearby, furnished it sparsely, and told coworkers he was giving Megan space. To outsiders, it looked mature. Inside, the distance curdled into something darker. Mark began to fixate on control. He checked Megan's Facebook. He worried about her, taking the kids away. She, in turn, felt watched, cornered. The boundary between them, once the place where compromise lived, turned into a fault line. That July, Megan wrote an open letter to Willow on Facebook. It was long, aching, and full of longing. You were my miracle, my fighter. I hope you're running free now, baby girl. Mommy misses you every breath. Beneath it, Mark left a single comment. Forever my angel. A week later, he bought a .38 caliber handgun that he told the clerk it was for home protection. Summer drifted across Berks County like a fever that wouldn't break. The grass outside the short home grew high, the blinds stayed drawn, and the laughter that once spilled through those walls was gone. Megan moved through the rooms like a ghost, collecting Willow's old clothes into boxes she couldn't seal. The crib stayed up. Every night she would touch its rail, whispering a good night into emptiness. Mark still visited. He brought groceries, hugged the kids, spoke softly to them in the living room while Megan folded herself into corners, watching. There was something different in his eyes now, an odd, focused calm, the quiet of a man rehearsing his own script. The neighbors saw them together on the porch once, talking in low voices. Megan's arms crossed tight, Mark's head lowered. It looked civil, even gentle. They couldn't hear the words. But if they could, they would have heard Megan saying she wanted a divorce, that she couldn't live inside grief and control anymore. Mark nodded, said he understood. But inside, a door had already closed. He told co-workers later that week that he was trying to hold it together, that he worried about Megan's depression. He smiled faintly, deflecting questions. No one saw the unease underneath, how he was beginning to keep track of her movements, how he printed photos of their children and taped them to his bedroom wall, like reminders of something slipping away. He visited a gun range. Practiced alone. The clerk remembered him as polite, precise, almost mechanical. In July, Megan began counseling again. She spoke about guilt, about motherhood, about the nights when she thought she could hear Willow's breathing over the baby monitor even though it was unplugged. The therapist noted severe grief, depressive ideation. She also noted that Megan mentioned Mark's withdrawal, his strange detachment. Still, Megan was trying. She took the kids to a local fair that month. There are photographs from that day. Liana with cotton candy, Mark Jr. on a carousel horse, Megan smiling too wide for the camera. The blue sky behind her looked endless, but in her eyes there was distance. Mark didn't go. He said he was working. In truth, he spent that evening scrolling through old pictures of the family, stopping on Willow's hospital photos. He stared at them for hours, his face unreadable. A week later, Megan confided to her mother that she planned to finalize separation papers. She wanted to move closer to her parents. I think he's trying to be strong, she said, but he doesn't talk about anything real anymore. Her mother asked if she was afraid of him. Megan hesitated, then shook her head. No, she said softly. Just worried. It's always like that before the end. Not terror, but worry. The kind that hums quietly under daily chores. On August 5, 2016, a Friday evening, Megan took the children to a friend's house. They played, laughed, ate dinner. Friends said she seemed tired but lighter somehow. She mentioned plans to meet Mark the next day to talk about logistics. She even joked that maybe they'd finally agree on something. That night, she tucked Liana and Mark Jr. into bed beside her. The house creaked. Outside, streetlights buzzed against the thick summer air. Around midnight, Mark's car pulled into the driveway. He'd brought flowers. He'd also brought the gun. The clock over the short kitchen stove read 12:43 a.m. when the car engine outside faded into stillness. The street was asleep. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. A porch light glowed yellow against the humidity. Mark sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, motionless, the faint pulse of the dashboard clock flicking across his face. He reached across the console, touched the bouquet of white lilies lying there, and exhaled as if finishing a prayer no one would ever hear. Inside, the house was dark except for a nightlight spilling from the hallway. He unlocked the front door with his key and closed it softly behind him. The living room still smelled faintly of baby powder and disinfectant, a scent that had clung since Willow's long illness. Photos lined the mantel. Birthdays, holidays, tiny hands clutching larger ones. He looked at them one by one, the way someone might study exhibits before a verdict. Upstairs, the children slept. Liana's arm hung over the edge of the bed, her small fingers twitching in dream. Mark Jr. breathed in slow, shallow rhythm beside her. Megan's bedroom door was half open, the sliver of lamplight painting an oblong stripe across the hallway carpet. He stood there a long time. Later investigators would find his footprints frozen in the carpet pile, the hesitation visible even in dust. But whatever war had been happening inside him ended in that pause. When he finally stepped through the doorway, he set the flowers on the dresser. Megan stirred, blinked. Mark, he told her he was sorry. Neighbors would later say they heard nothing, not a scream, not a thud. The first gunshot was muffled by a pillow. The second followed seconds later. Upstairs, the children woke, confusion flooding the air like static. Liana called out for her mother. Mark climbed the stairs. What happened next could never be reconstructed exactly. Police pieced it together from trajectories and shadows. But by the time dawn began to pale the windows, the house was utterly stilled at 7:50 a.m. A relative who hadn't heard from Megan overnight phoned police. Officers arrived just after 8. The first responder, Patrolman Andrew Wagner, later said the silence struck him hardest, the kind of silence that feels wrong the moment you open a door. The smell of gunpowder lingered faintly in the entryway. The officer called out names that no one answered. Upstairs, he found the children first, both still tucked under blankets, as if someone had wanted them to look asleep. In the master bedroom, Megan lay on the bed beside a vase of lilies. The revolver rested on the floor near Mark's hand. The medical examiner would later determine that all four, Megan, Liana, Mark Jr., and Mark himself, had died from single gunshot wounds to the head. The time of death was placed around 1 a.m. outside, the cul-de-sac filled with sirens, the whine of radios, and then the hush that always follows confirmation. Neighbors gathered barefoot in driveways, faces pale against flashing red and blue. Someone whispered, "The Shorts?" as though naming them might undo it. Inside the house, investigators cataloged everything. The flowers, the single spent cartridge on the carpet, the note left on the dresser that read only, "I'm sorry. We'll be together again." When the coroner's vans rolled away, the air seemed to collapse inward. Reporters arrived within hours. Television trucks parked at the end of the block, antennas tilted toward the sky. Headlines spoke of tragedy, of an apparent murder-suicide, but none of the words captured the oppressive stillness left behind at the hospital morgue that afternoon. Technicians laid the small bodies side by side. One of them later said quietly to another, "They even look like they're holding hands." The police chief gave a brief statement. There was no ongoing threat, no suspect at large. But the bigger question, why, hung unanswered in the humid Pennsylvania in the days that followed. Reporters combed through public records, Facebook pages, fragments of therapy notes. Friends spoke of grief that had consumed the family after Willow's death, of Megan's heartbreak, of Mark's strange detachment. Some remembered him as a kind father who adored his children. Others described a man hollowed out by guilt, clinging to control. The house remained sealed behind crime scene tape for a week. Inside, the lilies wilted, their scent turning sickly sweet. Outside, strangers left stuffed animals and candles at the curb. A note taped to a teddy bear read, "Fly high, little angels." By the second day, news vans had replaced school buses on Winding Brook Drive. Their satellite dishes rose above the maple trees like strange metal flowers. Cameras pointed toward the white-and-brick house, whose blinds never opened again. Reporters whispered over police tape, struggling to say the words murder-suicide without choking on them. They filmed the front porch, the sidewalk memorial, the faces of neighbors who could not stop crying. Inside the borough building, investigators laid out the evidence, ballistic tests, autopsy results, the note. Nothing suggested anyone else had entered the house. There were no defensive wounds on Megan or the children, no signs of forced entry. The conclusion was both simple and unbearable. Mark Short had killed his wife and 2 surviving children before turning the gun on himself. Chief George Stinsky stood before cameras that Monday afternoon, his face gray with fatigue. "We may never fully understand what led to this tragedy," he said, "but we know a family is gone." He ended the briefing early, voice cracking on the last word. In Reading Hospital's chapel, nurses who had once cared for little Willow lit a candle for her family. "We kept her alive for so long," one said softly. It's like the fight followed them home. The flame burned low against the votive glass. A single trembling bead of light in a room of silence. Megan's parents arrived from out of state to identify the bodies. They were led into a sterile viewing room lined with pale curtains. When they emerged, her mother collapsed into her husband's arms, whispering the same phrase again and again, all of them, all of them. The funerals were held together, 5 days later, in a church overflowing with flowers. 3 small white caskets stood beside one full-sized one, all draped in lilies and pink ribbons. The priest's homily tried to speak of peace, but the words dissolved in weeping. Outside, the August heat pressed against black suits and summer dresses. Reporters stayed at a respectful distance, recording only the wind through the cemetery trees. After the service, the coffins were lowered into the ground beside Willow's grave. The headstone would later bear 5 names, carved in perfect symmetry. The police file closed quickly, mechanically, almost mercifully. They found the gun's purchase receipt, dated a week before the killings. They found prescriptions for antidepressants that Mark had never filled. They found no sign that he had told anyone what he was planning. The Berks County District Attorney released a short statement confirming the case as a murder-suicide, born of profound psychological distress following the death of a child. But in private, even seasoned detectives admitted it felt like more than grief, something colder. An exhaustion so deep it inverted into annihilation. In the months that followed, Sinking Spring tried to resume its rhythms. The lawn outside the short home grew wild until a contractor finally cut it back. Mail piled up, then stopped. By winter, a for sale sign leaned in the frozen yard. Few came to look. The house sold nearly a year later to a family who said they believed in fresh starts. Yet the story would not vanish. For the local community, it became a kind of parable whispered over coffee and PDA meetings. That despair hides well behind suburban order. That silence can be fatal. Counselors were invited to the nearby elementary school to talk to children about grief. A scholarship was created in Willow's name for pediatric cardiac patients. One nurse wrote on the hospital's bulletin board, "Let's remember the living." 2. Megan's relatives tried to keep her memory separate from the crime. They released photos of her laughter, of Liana's soccer games, of Mark Jr. clutching his little sister's hand. "We don't want people to think of how they died," her father said quietly to a reporter. "We want them to remember that they were loved." But the internet does not forget. Each time another documentary about family annihilators aired, the Watts case, the Haigs, the List murders, commenters would mention Sinking Spring, linking articles, wondering what pushed Mark Short over the edge. No one could agree. Some said untreated depression, others an inability to face life without control. All theories circled the same emptiness. The former co-worker of Mark's told investigators that he'd seemed detached for months. "He talked about peace a lot," the man said. "Not happiness, peace. Like he was planning to rest." That word, rest, lingered in the report like a bruise. Years later, the house looks ordinary again. A new family planted hydrangeas by the mailbox. Children ride bikes up the same driveway where police once parked. But people who lived there in 2016 still glance away when they pass. They say that at dusk, the windows catch the light in such a way that you can almost see silhouettes. A man, a woman, 2 small figures, just for a second. Before the sun goes down, the truth, stripped of mystery, is still unbearable. Grief metastasized into despair. Despair into destruction. The medical files, the therapy notes, the silence between husband and wife. All small failures of connection that, stacked together, became fatal. When the anniversary arrives each August, a handful of locals leave candles at the cemetery. They don't speak. They just stand until the wax begins to melt and the wicks gutter out, leaving the faint scent of smoke and lilies. In that moment the town remembers, not the crime, but the lesson carved into its marrow, that love, left unspoken, can turn to dust. That sadness, untreated, can burn a house to ash without ever striking a match. And somewhere in the still Pennsylvania air, the echo lingers, a family of 5, reunited only in memory. Their story, a warning whispered softly enough for anyone to miss.